This is exercise 8B. So we're going to now look at what we call recurrence relations. Okay, recurrence relations, which is essentially what we were doing before, but we want to write that in a formula, right? Now here we go. What was my previous example? I started off with the number 5, right? That was my first number. And then I said, what was the pattern from 5 to 9 to 13 to 17? What's my pattern here? What am I doing? Plus 4. Now, there has to be a way to write this more succinctly, because that's going to lead into the next exercise in 8D is to write a rule. Okay, this is not a rule. This is more using terms and the language. So here, we call the first one, now I said there was the nth naught, right? They like to use the V, letter V, for value. So the value that you start off is V naught. So in this example here, they're saying V naught, which is when n equals to 0. So the nth term is the very first term. That's the original term. V for value. Okay? So the value, V naught, starts there. Notice what they write here. Now this is what students find a bit tricky to understand. All they're trying to say there, if the next one is V1, right? How did I get to 1? Like the idea, I know it's next one is 1, but if you want to model it, well then you can write V1 as V0 plus 1. True?
Yeah.
Okay, have a think, because I know sometimes the subscripts get people confused. So, if I wanted to get to V2, technically that is knowing what V1 is, add 1. True? Okay. Now, that's why in the subscription, or the sort of what they're saying here, is if you wanted to find Vn, sorry, if you knew what Vn was, which is the original one, then the next one must be n plus 1, which is what they've done here. So if you had V0, then the next one must be V0 plus 1. If you had V22, then the next one must be V22 plus 1. That's why in the formula you can see here, whatever Vn is, that could be 22. This would then have to be 23 because it's n plus 1. So they're trying to tell you this is a formula. This right here is a formula for whatever the starting n is, which we don't care. It doesn't have to be 0. It could be any n number. It could be 25, could be 99. But by writing n plus 1 here, we know that's the next term. Okay, so if this was V99, based on this formula, that would be 99 plus 1, which gives you 100. So that tells you the value, the 100th value term. Okay, whilst this one tells me that's the 99th value term. Okay, now in my rule before, our rule was to add 4. So how did I get V1? V1 was the result of knowing what V0 was, my original value, plus 4. True? And that's why the formula here makes more sense in what they're trying to say. That essentially is V0 plus 1, so that's my n plus 1, is equal to Vn, which is 0, plus 4. And that's why we can say, well, what is V0? That was 5. That's why it's 5 plus 4. V1 is 9. And if you follow the same sort of formula, it makes sense why V2, if you write it out, V2 is V1 plus 4. Okay, well, if I write it again just so that you can see what I'm doing, V1 plus 1, and this is V1 plus 4. You see what I'm doing there? So N2, V2, where N is the second term was found by finding the first term, adding 4. Okay? So your job now, if you can kind of understand what I'm saying there, your job now is they'll give you a series of sequences. Okay, so they'll give you this, a recurrence formula. You need to then find what those 4 values are. So you're essentially finding the terms. You're finding a sequence. So let's read this one as an example. This tells me V0 is 9, so that means I start off with 9. I need to be able to read this. This is what you need to be able to read. So that tells me that the next term, to find the next term, I need to take the original term minus 4. Okay, so if I follow this, this is how you're meant to write it. I'm going to write here, V0 is 9. To find the next term, the rule was Vn plus 1 is equal to Vn minus 4. So then I would then say here, following on the same formula, V0 minus 4 should give me V0 plus 1, which means V1 is equal to V0 minus 4, but we know that V0 is 9. So 9 minus 4 gives you 5. So V1 is 5. Now I know that you know in the sequence is 9, and then 5, and then 1, and then negative 3. Okay, I know you know that, but you need to be able to write it in this form. And that may be the language part that's confusing. So you might need to sit there and just have a look and do the comparisons. But in my working solutions here, I tried to show you with colors how I did it. So I started off with V0 is 9. V1 was the results, which is the same thing as saying V0 plus 1. That's V0 minus 4. That's based on the rule. So V0 minus 4, that's how I got 5. That's how I got my next iteration. That's how I got my next iteration. The sequence is clearly 9, 5, 1, negative 3. Okay, and they asked me to find 4 iterations. So that means I need to find V1, V2, V3, V4. Okay, so the first part started off with what is a sequence, what is a term. You understood that. Now you're trying to label the sequence in terms of these subscripts. That may be a language. Okay, and then as you go through to 8D, you'll see that you then convert it into a rule, because there's a problem with using these subscripts. Can anyone see what the problem is? Why don't we like using this rule? What's the limitations? Can anyone think of it? Just on a logical sense. One, it takes too long. But two, every one of them relies on the previous result. So if I wanted to find V3, I need to know what V2 is. V2, then I can subtract 4. So if we follow the pattern was 9, 5, 1, negative 3, negative 7, negative 11, it goes on, right? Now this is my 0 term, first term, second term, third term, fourth term, fifth term. But the only way to know the sixth term is you need to know the fifth term. But if I asked you, what is the 99th term then? How would you find that out? See, that's now hard. You can't use that rule to predict the 100th term. You'd actually have to calculate each one. It takes too long to do. Okay, so that's why, because it relies on your previous value. So that's what we want to do for 8B today. I'm going to leave you there. So that's exercise 8B. You're learning to do this part. So I'm going to leave those working solutions so you can copy and get used to that. Okay, I'm going to stop the video, and it's your session to get your head around these terms.